an audience that you have to bring meaning, figure out meaning for it, because it's there long enough to ask you for meaning.
Yes, and with your images, you don't go for the operatic, like Werner Herzog. He would use an image like that for the sublime quality only. He would go to film the burning oil fields in Kuwait. I think this film is very important too, but it's a completely different approach. Do you like Werner Herzog's work? Do you have?
Well, I do and I don't mainly because what you're saying, but that's because I feel that I feel strongly for the way I work. It's not that one's right and one's wrong. It's more of taste, and politically, I feel more comfortable with what I do than dramatizing things.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Well, I'm quite interested. Why did you come to Duisburg?
I had been invited to the film week that plays there. There's a film festival in November, and to teach some master classes, because the director of that festival heard that I was doing these classes where I would take students out and we would spend 10 hours in a location and we would just observe, and I would get them to practice paying attention. And he liked that idea a lot, so he hired me 2 years in a row to do master classes there. And then on the second time I was there, after I was done, he was wondering if I'd be interested in making a film there. And by that time I got to know Duisburg enough to feel the connection to my own hometown, and I thought, yeah, I'll make a film there. And I told them what the film would be, because I had visited all of these places that are in the film, and they actually came out of this experience of teaching there. So yeah, and I like visiting there. I feel really comfortable in Duisburg.
Yeah, I was really wondering how you found the places, locations.
Yeah. Well, the first year I was asked to teach there, I said, if I'm going to teach there, I have to come a week early before I have the class, and you have to find me a few people that know the steel, who worked in steel mills and know the industry well and have access and can take me around, and then somebody that would know more of a rural area. And when I flew into Duisburg, I realized I was flying over this forest, and I definitely wanted to revisit that place. And when I went there with this person taking me around, who first took me to steel mills, then he took me to the forest next to the airport, and I wanted to stay until it got dark, because I wanted to see what the landing lights would do as they came in. So the classes that I took there, I took at dusk, and then we watched how the light changed there, and then how when the planes land and they light up the forest and the shadows change like this. And that's what actually I wanted to film for this film, but when I got there I realized the landing lights are bright enough to excite my retina, but weren't bright enough to excite my camera's retina. So I filmed this scene instead. And I liked this scene a lot. And now again, I was very lucky because there was no wind. And if there would have been wind, then you wouldn't see how this airplane actually creates a weather system when it lands. And the weather system is drug behind the landing plane, sometimes 10 seconds, sometimes 30 seconds behind. And by having this motionless day, I was lucky enough to catch the wind that comes through there. And just that, from paying close attention to that space, I learned something that day about what jet planes do to our environment, a very subtle change that's happening. And I really liked recording that and finding it. And I think the shot is quite long. I think it's 20 minutes long, but you have to see it a number of times to realize that it isn't just coincidence, that every time it happens, and then it happens quite differently depending on the size of the plane and how low they are to the ground as to how much wind you would get. So it's a good example. I mean, this film is a good example of the class that I teach there. So, and that shot is maybe one of my favorite shots I've ever made, because it really reveals this information that can be found from pure observation. It's a simple notion, but I think it's very strong.
Any other
Can I
questions?
ask another question?
Yeah, please.
You know, that frame in the mosque, that the camera position was quite strange to me. And why did you choose it, and how did the people react? From my point of view, it was sort of tricky. You saw the people at the height of their bumps, if I may say so.
It's a 2-hour shot, and I set up the shot. I could either shoot. They gave me two places I could film from, either the back or the front, and I knew I didn't want to face the crowd because everybody would be looking at the camera, and so I wanted again a shot that I wouldn't be so noticeable. I didn't know the mosque was going to fill up so much, and I was delighted when it filled up, then blocked me, and I couldn't see anything but the back of 2 people. I thought this is kind of amazing. And then I actually like the angle a lot, because it really captures in the first half of the shot how that religion prays in unison, and then you can also see that there's people anxious to leave. They've paid their dues and they want to get out, like probably happens in all churches, not just Hamas, that some people do that. Some are happy to stay, but then there's a number of people that go back and they pray individually, and I think it's really beautiful when they pray individually. And I never have been part of an organized religion, so I'm rather dogmatic about all religions, but I was very moved by the praying at the end, because I was frightened by the praying in the beginning. It's all in unison, and even though it's actually kind of a beautiful ceremony, for me it's a frightening idea to do that. But I'm just telling you something from inside. I'm hoping my film doesn't show my prejudice. I'm telling you my prejudice now, but I'm hoping the film is open enough that you decide what it means. But generally I don't tell exactly what it means for me, but that's exactly how I felt about it. And it was a really good experience for me. One reason, because they were very happy to have us film there. It was a mosque that was supposed to be built in this city, and this city didn't want the mosque, or at least I was told that. And the mayor of Duisburg kind of embraced to have it built there. I don't know what her intention was, but so it was built there. And when they built the mosque, they built the site with big glass windows. So when you go by, you can look in and you can see they're not plotting the next terrorist attack, but they're actually serious about praying and being religious. And so that was the same feeling they gave me, that they were very happy for me to show what goes on in that building, because of the problems of radical Islam of making all Muslims terrorists, right? And so they want to debunk that. So they were very, very appreciative to have me film there.
But the Cologne mosque has finally been built.
Okay.
It's even bigger than that one.
Okay, so.
Any other questions? Would you like to introduce the next film, Landscape Suicide?
I keep thinking this is. I could do that. It was made in 1987. So that's what, 26 years ago. And I was before I made it, I was riding on a train from Milwaukee to New York, and my daughter was with me, and she was reading a Rolling Stone magazine, and she tore out 4 pages from the magazine and handed it to me, and she said, "Here, I don't want to read this, this scares me." So I was curious to read what she was scared about, and it was the story about a young girl that was killed. And so I read that story, and I could see that she was very, very upset from it. And then I thought, when I was a young kid, when I was about her age, I think she was about 11 or 12 at that time, in Wisconsin, we had a double killing that made the newspaper headlines, and it was it was so horrendous that grade school kids would make jokes about it, right? Because that's what you do, and you can't understand really what was going on. And I thought, well, maybe I should make a film about those 2 stories, and so that's what Landscape Suicide is. The title refers to incidents happening in particular landscapes that affect the people in those the social landscape in such a way that it almost commits suicide to that social landscape. It comes from a book I was reading about 4 years earlier called Passing Through Slaughter, by the writer who wrote The English Patient. You're good with names.
No, I'm good with names, but this one I forgot. You're good with names. I'm sure I have it right here. But
it's a long African name.
I know. He also wrote about the cinema. He wrote this book about.
Yeah.
Anyway. He wrote this book about editing.
Passing Through Slaughter was about a jazz musician from New Orleans around the turn of the 1900s. And he was a really good trumpet player, but he was very anxious. So when he would play from town to town, he couldn't stay around much. He would play and then he would leave quickly. And this author called him committing landscape suicide, which meant he would leave the town quickly. But mine doesn't mean that. But when I read that, I thought, oh, that's such a beautiful title for something. So 5 years later, I titled this film. But there's 2 good performances. I actually have actors in this film. So.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.